Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Retold by Lesley Sims. Illustrated by Joven. Once upon a time, a king and a queen had a beautiful baby girl. When she was born, snow was falling in soft flakes outside, so they named her Snow White. Soon after, the queen died, and the king married again. The new queen was vain, with a cruel, cold heart. Every morning she would gaze in her mirror and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" The mirror would always reply, "You are," until one dreadful day when it said, "Snow White." Snow White had become the sweetest, kindest girl in the kingdom. The queen hated her. And the queen's jealousy grew until she summoned the royal huntsman. "Take Snow White to the forest," she snapped, "and leave her to die." The huntsman was horrified, but what could he do? "Run," he begged Snow White. "Keep running until you find help." Heart thumping, legs pounding, Snow White ran. She ran through the night and into the dawn. At last she came to the edge of the forest. There stood a curious little house. Snow White crept up to it and knocked rat-a-tat-tat on the door. 7 dwarves came rushing out. "Hello!" they chorused. "Welcome! Come in! Come in!" Jigging and jostling, they bustled her inside. Then they sat her down, and Snow White told her tale. "The queen is wicked," they said, with a shake of their heads. "Stay with us. We'll look after you." The next morning the queen strode up to her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" "Snow White, of course," the mirror declared. "She's still alive!" screeched the queen. Almost bursting with rage, she donned a disguise and hobbled through the forest. With a rat-a-tat-tat, she knocked at the dwarf's door. "Pretty ribbons for a pretty girl," she croaked, tying a sash around Snow White's waist, tighter and tighter and tighter, until Snow White gasped and collapsed to the floor. And there she stayed until the dwarfs found her. "Quick, undo the sash!" they cried. "It must have been that evil queen." The next morning the dwarfs set off for work. "Be careful," they told Snow White, "and don't try on any more sashes." Snow White was busy sewing when she heard a young girl call out, "Glittery combs for sale." "Here, try one," said the girl, holding it up. But as Snow White placed it in her hair, she fell to the floor once more. "Ha!" cackled the girl, turning into the villainous queen. "My poisoned comb will finish you for good." The dwarves arrived just in time to snatch the comb away. When the mirror announced that Snow White was still the fairest of all, the queen was furious. "I will get rid of her!" she snarled, and she cast a terrible spell. "Crisp sweet apple, rosy red, just one bite and fall down dead." Disguised again, the queen returned to Snow White. "Try my scrumptious apple," she cooed. Snow White took a bite and dropped, lifeless, to the ground. This time the dwarves could not help her. "She's too lovely to bury," they sobbed, and placed her in a glass coffin. After a year and a day, a prince rode past. "That poor girl!" cried the prince. He swept her into his arms, and the piece of apple flew from her mouth. "Oh!" murmured Snow White, opening her eyes. It was true love. Snow White and the prince married a year later, and all 7 dwarves carried her train. The story of Snow White is over 700 years old. This version is based on a retelling by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, who lived in Germany in the early 1800s. In 1937, Walt Disney turned the story into one of the most famous fairy tale movies of all time. Edited by Jenny Tyler and Susanna Davidson. Designed by Russell Punter and Brenda Cole. Digital manipulation by Nick Wakeford.